So in our chronological run-through of the Clone Wars over on Battle Analysis, we're getting to the point of the conflict where the Republic is going to transition from the Phase 1 Clone Trooper armor to the Phase 2 Clone Trooper armor that we see commonly used during the final third of the conflict. So I figured today we'd take a look at Phase 2 Clone Trooper armor and its differences compared to Phase 1, and maybe why the Republic made this transition and what this transition was like. I'm Colin, and this is Sci-Fi Deep Dive. Remember, if you enjoyed this video, to head down below and hit that subscribe button. So the Phase 2 Clone Trooper armor is the armor we see debuted in Revenge of the Sith. It's an advanced version of the Clone Trooper armor, and by the end of the conflict, it was standard issue for nearly all clone units. It serves as a midpoint between the Clone Trooper armor, the Phase 1 armor seen in Attack of the Clones, and the Stormtrooper armor seen in the original trilogy utilized by the Galactic Empire. So it plays a very interesting aesthetic role, but it also is a very interesting logistical choice for the Republic to switch from the Phase 1 to the Phase 2, so we're going to focus on that today. So let's start at the beginning with the Phase 1 armor. This is the armor that the Clone Troopers have been using so far in the war, and the Phase 1 armor was really good armor in spite of a lot of difficulties it faced. You see, the Kaminoans who manufacture the armor for the Clone Troopers had never built an armor set for humans before, and while they looked into a lot of other factions and organizations in the galaxy that had manufactured armor for humans, they didn't have any real hands-on experience, so the Clone Trooper armor was really their first foray into armor for people, and that being considered, they actually did pretty good, but not perfectly. The Phase 1 Clone Trooper armor was said to be bulky and hard to maneuver in, and kind of cumbersome to wear. On top of that, it wasn't very tactically versatile. Well, it had a lot of built-in features, things like a built-in atmosphere generator allowing it to function basically seamlessly in a vacuum, and a built-in communications array allowing the trooper in the armor to communicate over very long distances. It also lacked the ability to have specialized equipment, things like long-range scopes or more advanced communication equipment, limiting its battlefield flexibility. So, around the midpoint of the war, work began on a more advanced set of armor. This would become the Phase 2 armor, but there was actually a gradual transition, and those of you with a keen eye may have actually already spotted it on the battlefield so far. The Phase 2 Clone Trooper armor is actually debuted far earlier in the conflict with the ARC program. The Advanced Reconnaissance Commando program, which were soldiers that were picked from the regular ranks for extreme acts of bravery and heroism, to be sort of promoted and put into command roles. These ARC commandos were more advanced and more skilled than other clone troopers, and they were given an armor set to match that. This armor set was, in most cases, especially leading up to the transition to the Phase 2 armor, a prototype version of the Phase 2 armor, and we see this during the battles of Kamino and the raid on the Citadel, most notably. But by this point in the war, it's starting to be rolled out to the general population of clone troopers. Now, why switch to this new armor? Because there's another big downside to the Phase 2. The Phase 2 Clone Trooper armor is significantly more expensive than the Phase 1. On top of that, it was less functional on its own. The Phase 2 Clone Trooper armor lacked the built-in atmosphere generators of the Phase 1, meaning that any clone troopers intending to operate in a vacuum needed specialized equipment that would be attached to the Phase 2 Clone Trooper armor that you wouldn't need with the Phase 1 armor. On top of that, it lacked the long-range communications array that was present in the Phase 1 armor, replacing it with a shorter range, sleeker communications array that allowed for communication between closer units, but limited the communication over longer distances. Now, both of these drawbacks could be mitigated by additional equipment that could be added to the armor, things like advanced radios that could be mounted as a backpack, or a rebreather system that could be mounted to the front of the helmet, but they weren't standard on the armor like they were in the Phase 1s. So why exactly would the Republic make this transition to a more expensive and, on paper, less functional set of armor? Well, it comes down to unit specialization, something that the Republic during the later stages of the war really understood, but the Galactic Empire seems to have forgotten. The Republic realized that to beat the Confederacy of Independent Systems on the battlefields of the galaxy, they needed highly specialized soldiers, things like snipers and commanders and logistic units and pilots and all kinds of different roles to be filled by a variety of different clone troopers trained in different specialties. And to facilitate these different specialties, they needed to be able to use a variety of different equipment. And to facilitate that, they needed a more versatile armor set. An armor set that, by the way, drew on the lessons learned from the first armor set and was more comfortable for the wearer. So here you have a set of armor that's more versatile than the Phase 1 armor, being more mobile and more customizable for different roles the clone troopers might be filling, but you also have armor that is more expensive and less functional on its own. That being said, the Grand Army of the Republic also realized that a lot of the features that were built into the clone trooper armor were kind of redundant or unnecessary. There was only a few circumstances where the clone troopers, for example, would operate in a vacuum and end up needing the built-in atmosphere in the suit. Same thing with the long-range communication. Generally, their structure of command left a few soldiers designated as sort of communications officers or radio personnel who would use their long-range communication systems, and the rest of them would mainly rely more on short-range communication to get information around. So the more advanced features of the Phase 1 weren't really necessary. Ultimately, the Phase 2 armor would serve up to the end of the war and into the reign of the Galactic Empire, eventually being replaced by the Stormtrooper armor, which would become the mainstay armor of the Galactic Empire. If you'd like to learn more about some of the key differences between the Phase 1 and the Phase 2 Clone Trooper armor, I'll leave a link up here to a video I did a while back on basically directly comparing the two sets of armor and trying to figure out which one's better. And I'd like you to let me know down in the comments whether you think this transition was smart this late in the war. It ultimately required replacing the armor of all of your troopers. Do you think it would have made sense to hold off on replacing the armor until after the conflict, especially if you're shifting to a more expensive armor? Or do you think it makes sense to move into this more specialized armor set, army-wide, midpoint in a galactic war? And if you have anything else you'd like to see me cover in Star Wars, you can let me know down below in the comments. Last but not least, if you enjoyed this video, head down below, hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell icon so you get notified when I upload new videos. So for Sci-Fi Deep Dive, I'm Colin, and I will see you next time.